My name is Ishtar Lakhani. I am calling in from a very sunny, very warm Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to this webinar for me to share things that I'm really excited by. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been working in human rights advocacy and campaigning for, horrifyingly to say, over 2 decades. Um, and I get to collaborate with some of the most amazing organizations in the world, doing the most incredible work, trying to change this world. Uh, and so let me do that thing one does, which is sharing one screen. Um, I promise you there's not going to be a lot of text. It's just going to be loads of pictures because I like pictures. Um, and so we're going to start with why this, why now? So this are just some of the headlines that I pulled up from this week. Um, this is the stuff that's happening. The world is on fire. I was in a meeting recently, and there was just really a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of we can't change anything, a feeling of um, what can we do in this context? And I realized that I didn't feel that way. I was filled with kind of an energy of hope and optimism and an energy and desire for change. And I was like, well, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling like actually we can do this? Am I in denial? Am I naive? Am I kind of ignorant to like the actual issues that are happening in this world? Like, do I just not know enough? Um, and I realized why I had this energy in me and I had this excitement for the challenges that we have ahead of us. And it's because I get the opportunity every day in my waking hours to work with organizations, people, movements that are really working to change the world. And not only working to change the world, actually changing it, actually winning in their campaigns. And this is just my daily inspiration. And so some of the organizations I've collaborated with over the years, these are just a few of them, just doing the most incredible game-changing work. And I thought, let me take the opportunity to share some of the learnings I've had. I've really had the privilege of working with many incredible movements, and through the years, I've started to put together some of my lessons, but never kind of in a comprehensive, consolidated way. And so for me, this is kind of my humble first attempt to try and bring together some of those lessons over the last 20 years to see if they could be useful to anyone else trying to do kind of change work and campaigning work. Because at the same time, these are also some of the headlines. Like, it's also good to remember that change is possible. So these are also some of the headlines that I pulled out from this week, just to make sure that we're starting on the right foot. Um, so to begin with, this is a question, probably my favorite question of all time. It's a question that I've asked hundreds, if not going on thousands of people, um, all through the years. And it's what what made you care? I mean, you clearly care. You care enough to spending an hour of your Friday here with me. You care enough to be spending your life really dedicating yourself to a particular issue. What was it that made you care? Um, I mean, if I think about it, if I go back in time, um, it probably the moment was happening in my youth growing up. Um, I remember like growing up in Durban during apartheid South Africa, and I remember going to my grandmother's house. And I remember there always being a particular tension around my grandmother's house where like and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I was a little bit older, where my brother was immediately said, come, you sit down on the couch, Ishtar, come to the kitchen. And that would always bring some conflict between my grandmother and my mother, because that was the thing. We went over, I went into the kitchen, and my brother stayed in the lounge. And after a few years, I realized that that tension was because my parents were raising me in a feminist household with not having those gender roles, and clearly those gender roles came up against very traditional Gujarati gender roles of my grandmother. And that was my first kind of, oh, whoa, like there's a difference. There's a difference. People, the genders are being treated differently. What's going on here? And that made me first care about kind of equality. And I think was one of the first things that led me down the path of working specifically in women's rights, working around gender-based violence. So I'd like you to take a moment just in your mind to just think about what was that moment for you? Like, what was the moment that made you care about, not necessarily about your particular issue, but care about something that you want to do, you want to get off your bum and change it. You want to do something. Um, and I've asked these questions to, yeah, hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they often gave me very similar answers. They all spoke about a visceral thing that happened to them that made them care, whether it be someone growing up in a household where there was gender-based violence and them saying this, I decided that I wanted to do something about it, or seeing a friend subjected to racism, or whether it was a family member contracting TB because they worked in the mines and caring about workers' rights. They were all very personal, personal things that happened to people that moved them to care about a particular issue. And why this question is so important for me when we're thinking about advocacy, when we're thinking about campaigning, is what are we trying to do? We're trying to move other people to care, right? We're trying to get other people to care about our issue, ideally as much as we care about our issue. And when I've asked that question, not one person said to me, you know what? I read a social media post and that really moved me to dedicate my life to this issue. Or I watched a panel, or I attended a conference, or I came to a webinar, or I read a pamphlet. No one has ever said that to me. And that was really an important shift for me, because I realized what are the ways that we judge good campaigning? What are the kind of tick boxes that we do? And we go, yes, okay, cool. We've written a white paper, we've done some research, we did some social media posts, we did some interviews, we had a webinar, but those weren't the things that moved you to care. Why do we think that it would move others to care? So I'm not saying we mustn't use these tactics. These tactics are important, but at the end of the day, we really need to think, what are the things that moved us, and how do we create those feelings in other people? And that's our job as people creating advocacy campaigns. And why do we think that all these tactics will move people? Because I think it's steeped in this idea that the truth will set us free. Um, we have this very earnest, very good-hearted intention that if people just knew the information, they would make the right decision. If policymakers knew the facts, they would put in the right laws. If the public was aware of what is going on, then they would act and change something. So this idea that all people need is the information, it needs the facts. And we can clearly see, unfortunately, none of us would be here if that was the case. Unfortunately, the truth does not set us free. Unfortunately, the truth needs help. The truth needs help to get people to feel what you're trying to get them to experience. And so that's really important. I mean, I think about an example. For a lot of campaigns, I know their goals are to raise awareness. Like we've heard this a million times. What is your campaign trying to achieve? We're trying to raise awareness. For me, raising awareness is just the first point. Raising awareness is not enough. Raising awareness doesn't create any kind of behavior change. I used to be a smoker for a very, very long time. Was I aware that it's not good for me? Yes. Did I have all the facts? Have I read the studies? Um, did I know? Did I see the adverts? Yes, I did. I was very much aware. Did that change my behavior? No, it didn't. What did change my behavior was falling in love with a non-smoker. Um, so that was the thing that eventually got me to quit. I was moved to quit. And so this is something I think we struggle with and we need to grapple with when we're creating our advocacy campaigns, because we really focus on what we want people to think, what we want people to know, and we don't focus a whole lot on what we want people to feel and how we're going to move people to care. So the Center for Artistic Activism has, don't worry, I'm going to be rattling off quite a few names of organizations and collaborators and things. You will get this all afterwards in a lovely email with some resources, because these organizations do the best work. But the Center for Artistic Activism has this wonderful concept that when I came across it, I was like, this captures what I'm trying to communicate. As activists or advocates, or generally people working in the environmental and human rights space, we are very effective with an E. Like, we get stuff done. We are organized. We mobilize. Like, we can, I'm sure a bunch of you, like, if we needed to organize a march tomorrow, we'd be able to do it. We're very effective. We get stuff done. Art, and I say this in the kind of grand scheme of things, kind of art, the creative industry, um, is very affective. So that is with an A. So it has an ability to move people. It has the ability to really, when you look at a painting, when you hear a piece of music, when you see a bit of creative product, you feel things without a lot of words, without a lot of explanation. And that's awesome. But where the magic happens in between, because I love artists. Some of my best friends are artists, but they cannot organize their way out of a paper bag sometimes. Not the most effective humans sometimes. But where the magic comes is when you merge the two. So affect and effect. They call it effect, not like iPhone, but I is in the pirate. So I effect. So really thinking about where is that magic that comes when you merge kind of advocacy and artistry. And that really, really resonated with me. And so I know a whole bunch of you are going like, oh no, what are you talking about? I'm not creative. And this is nonsense. All of you have some sort of creative practice that you bring to your work. And this could be anything from being an amazing cook, or I don't know, making an amazing playlist, or fashion, or you know what is really creative? Some of the funder reports that we have to write, like that's where you channel your creativity. Some of the budgets that we have to make. I know some people that do the most amazing creative work through spreadsheets. So we all have some sort of creative practice that we bring to our work. And so I'm going to start off with these kind of 6 major questions that I found in my work with organizations in how to kind of build a successful, creative, effective campaign. I find that in my experience, when these questions are gone through in this order, often results in the most amazing creative campaigns. We can't do all of them in 1 hour or 45 minutes. It's not going to happen. But we're going to just focus on the first 3 for now, and how to kind of build the foundation of an effective advocacy campaign. And so it starts with, what does winning look like? This is something we do not spend enough time or energy on. We need to think about, what does winning look like, and most importantly, feel like when you've won? Because often we don't think about it. We don't spend time on it. And it is really, really important, because we need to create that image. We need to have a deep, visceral understanding of, what does the world look like when we've won? Because when we can start creating that, that gives us a really good basis to work with. Because as activists, we're very good at saying what we don't want. Like, we are the best at saying what we don't want. We want to stop this, we want to end this, we want to bring down that. But we're not very good at painting a picture of what does winning look like. And this is really a really important thing for us, because winning gives us direction and focus. It shows us where we need to go. It makes sure that when we're making decisions, we are able to strategically pivot and align and take us in that direction. It's very motivating. Spending a little bit of time imagining that world, that winning world, when you've won your issue, it is really motivating. Most important for me is it inspires others. Because quite often I've done an exercise in a group of 30 different people with working on very different issues. And they had to paint a picture of what the world looked like after they've won. And what was remarkable is those worlds were very similar. And these were people working on completely different issues, but they all imagined a very similar world. And that is something amazing for me. That is, for me, that's like a missed trick. Like, if you're working on an issue and someone's working on something completely different, but you're trying to build the same world, um, that's a really good space for collaboration. So being able to articulate what winning looks like, it inspires others, and it comes from a generative space. So, and it's science. So another colleague of mine, which I work with, Thomas Coombs, so he does hope-based communication, and he is like a brain science nerd. And he explained to me how there's kind of your upper and lower brain, and it's different parts of your brain. And when you experience anything or hear words or see pictures that are negative, it kind of triggers your lower part of your brain. And that basically comes out of fear, and it closes people off to kind of imagining new ideas and being open to new ideas. And then there's the higher brain, where empathy, compassion, all those things, the good stuff, that's what we want. And that part of the brain is triggered when we're feeling safe, when we're inspired, through humor, through laughter. So this for me was really important, because clearly, like, people have been using the science. Think about advertising, think about marketing, think about Coke, open happiness. Like, advertisers and marketers are very good at creating that world, because they know it opens you up. It opens a particular part of your brain. And so how can we use this in our advocacy and campaigning? So I'm going to share an example of like this in real life, and how we used it in the work. So I completely redid this presentation because I was going to focus on kind of different organizations from around the world and different issues and campaigns, and some that I've worked on, some that I haven't. And after this week and all the world on fire, I chose to make it very personal. And so I'm going to be sharing campaigns and stories for things that I was very involved in as an individual, because I'm also needing inspiration in this day and age, and it's only 7th of February. And so the example I'm going to share, that came from a space of what does winning look like, is during our South African national elections. We're having national elections, and there's a lot of activists who are like, we're not doing any campaigning, we're not launching any campaigns, we're not doing anything during elections because there's such noise. We're not going to be able to like meet the budgets that like these political parties are doing. So we're just going to chill, and then after the elections, then we'll launch our campaigns. And I was looking around at my colleagues, and I was like, okay, but what would winning look like in this context? Like, what would the dream be in this election context? And our dream that we came up with was, what if we had, and this is a movement that I feel very close to, is I work with sex worker rights in South Africa, is in the sex worker rights space, what would a win look like? It would be a dream if we had a sex worker for president. Like, wouldn't that be like super, super cool? And so we thought about this, and we're like, okay, why not? Why not? And so we took a little bit of money that we had, small, scrappy organization, and we created a fake political party that we called SWAG, the Sex Workers Action Group, and we had the wonderful Duduzile Dlamini, who was our candidate. And we made a couple of good-looking election posters. We made a small campaign video, and we decided to run a campaign in the noise of elections in South Africa. And so people believed it. People believed it. We caused a buzz on social media, and people were like, whoa, what's going on? This is amazing. We want to do this. Where do we vote? And we were like, whoa, okay, because we were expecting a huge backlash, and we didn't get it. So this was a lesson for us in that, okay, clearly people have an appetite for change. People want this. So we were very excited. But remember what this webinar is about. It's about winning. And I like winning, and people who know me know I like winning. And so the aim of this campaign wasn't to cause a buzz on social media. The aim of this campaign was to get on political agendas. Like, that's what we wanted to do. Always eyes on the prize. And so that was the goal. And we got that. So this is the election manifestos of that year for the two biggest opposition parties in South Africa. And they put sex worker rights in their election manifestos. They believed enough. We were invited to enough events. We were in enough panels. We were in enough spaces where it actually contributed to the political conversation. This is something that had never happened in the history of South Africa. And for us, this was such an amazing lesson in kind of what it could mean to be able to imagine what winning could look like. Some of the lessons that we learned from this campaign is to dream, is to like really think about what winning would look like. To show, not tell people. I think quite often we forget that the word demonstration comes from the word demonstrate, to demonstrate. So we need to show people. We need to cultivate desire. We need to show people what a world could look like. And actually, it would be pretty cool and pretty fun, and you'd want to be part of this world. You need to think about changing the narrative, because also this completely shifted the narrative around sex work, because we all know the stereotypes that are often portrayed about sex workers. And this was like, wait, for president, that's different. I'm curious about that. The first rule of guerrilla warfare: know the terrain and use it to your advantage. So think about your context. Think about, okay, there's a lot of noise going on. And I know a lot of people sent in pre-questions. I'm hoping that through these different examples, you can see some answers to those questions. But it really is about, okay, when there's so much going on, when there's so much grappling for people's attention, how can you use your terrain to advantage? And finally, this could be a popular one, unpopular one, I don't know, but have fun. We talk a lot about burnout, fatigue, tiredness. This campaign was successful. It achieved what we wanted to achieve, was being put on the political agenda. But it wasn't exhausting. It was fun. We had a great time. I think if this video plays, let's see if this video plays. It's part of the campaign.
Your rights, your freedom, your step.
Having a great time. So that for me was the power of just being able to paint a picture of what does a win look like. The second part of this campaign, kind of building a campaign, is about what do we want? And this might sound really obvious. Like, okay, now that you've you understand where you want to go. Now you understand you viscerally understand what winning looks like, feels like. Yeah, we want to. It's the pretty obvious next step. Say, okay, what do we want to change? What do we need to change? This section is usually where I think a lot of the wheels fall off, 99% of the time, because often we're really very vague about what we want. My favorite example, we want to raise awareness in the community. We want to pass a particular law. All this is really quite vague, and then it's hard to really narrow and hone in for the rest of the campaign building process if you don't know exactly what it is you want. The trick to be able to build a creative campaign is let's be honest, it's totally boring. One of the tools are super boring. It's SMARTY objectives. So like specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. So thinking about what are the goals we want to create, but thinking about in order to have that policy passed, who needs to do what? Whose awareness do you need to raise for what reason? And then what do they need to do? If you talk about part of the goal is to kind of I don't know, empower a group. If you want to empower a group, who is that group and what are they going to do with their empowered selves? Because a campaign to empower an adolescent, for example, is very different to a campaign that will empower a pensioner in order for it to be really, really effective. So one of the other goals, spaces I draw from is design thinking. So what you will gather in this webinar is that I am a methodological slut. I am promiscuous when it comes to my methodologies. I like to draw from all kinds of thinking and all kinds of spaces. And this is specifically from design thinking. So in design thinking, they have something called a how might we question, which is a focusing question. It's thinking about what it is we want, but in an open, generative way. So the how might we create space to come up with creative solutions. So really thinking about what action do you want to see? Because we don't often think about it. We don't put a word to it. But a campaign to educate is very different from a campaign to inspire, is different from a campaign to empower, is different from a campaign to mobilize. So to just take a moment and think about, okay, what is the action word? Then who is the audience? Because unfortunately, there is no such thing as the community. Um, in order for a campaign to be effective, we really need to hone in our audience, what language they use, what cultural language they use. And in order to do that, we need to know them. We need to do a deep dive into who our audience is. And as a result, there is no such thing as the community. So really thinking about what action do we want from which audience, and then what is the insight? Why do we want that audience to do that thing? Like there must be a reason. We often just kind of roll with the kind of assumptions when we create campaigns, and we don't think about, okay, what is the insight that we have that means that we want to target this audience for a particular action. And then the most important thing, what is the impact? What change do you want to see? What is the change in behavior do you want for people? Because also, like, we like to win and we like to know that we're winning. And it's really good to know what the impact we want to see is, because then we can measure whether our campaign is winning or not and whether we need to pivot really quickly. If we don't have a clear understanding of this, then it's very hard to track whether we need to kind of be agile, change the messaging, change the tactics a little bit. So I'm going to share an example of kind of when we tried to use this to kind of focus our minds and ask a very particular thing of a particular audience. And this was back in the day, feels so long ago, the 2016 International AIDS Conference. It's the biggest public health conference in the world, and it came to our backyard. It came to Durban in Cape Town, or Durban in South Africa. And we were like, okay, we're going to show up here en masse. What is it that we want to do? We wanted to achieve a lot of things, but one of the things we wanted to achieve is we wanted to make aware the attendees of the International AIDS Conference. We wanted them to realize that the voices of sex workers had been excluded in these conversations. And we wanted the impact to be sex workers' rights become part of specifically the conference agenda. So this was like, okay, eyes on the prize. We know what we want. Now we can brainstorm how we want to get there. So the second I hear raise awareness, you know me, we like to protest. We like to storm the stage with a placard. That is our favorite thing. That is something tried and tested. That is something we love to do. That is something we continue to do, is storm the stage and kind of have a placard. The problem is it's become so much a part of kind of the conference space that at the AIDS conference there now is a specific slot which you can apply to storm the stage and hold a placard. So it's kind of been co-opted. It doesn't take anyone by surprise anymore. It's part of the narrative, and a very expected thing. And so we're like, okay, let's not do that. Also, we wanted to think about how did we want people to feel? So when we think about our advocacy campaigns, I'll always go back to feeling. What do we want people to feel? Um, and from my side, I really wanted people, and we really wanted people to like feel like they could include us, to feel that actually, like we're not calling you out, we're just wanting to be a part of the conversation. And we want to be included, and we want you to feel curious about our work and what we do. And so when we were brainstorming along those lines around what we want people to feel, because when people protest and hold up banners, people feel a particular way. And a lot of the time it's calling out, a lot of the time it makes people feel scared, it makes people feel attacked. And we're like, okay, what if we move past outrage? What are the other feelings that we can access when we think about campaigning? So anger, yes, really important. Kind of outrage, yes. But there's a whole spectrum of human emotions that we can call on when we're thinking about our campaigns. And so one of the things we decided to do was create a sign. And the sign had a count up clock on it. And it was very simple. And it just said, you've been talking for, without a mention of sex work. And in this picture, you see the wonderful Steve Lambert. He's the founder of the Center for Artistic Activism, and the even more marvelous Marlies Richter, a kind of public health ninja here in South Africa, putting their white privileged bodies on the lines for us, on the line for us during this conference. And we thought, okay, let's do this sign instead at the opening, where there will be thousands and thousands of people filling the International AIDS Conference. And so we held it up while the speakers were speaking, and the clock kept on counting. And we were like, okay, first speaker didn't mention sex work. Okay, second speaker didn't mention sex work. Okay. But then this happened.
To address these challenges adequately, we must ask, who is vulnerable? Throughout the world, sex workers and their clients
Okay, that went on for over 30 seconds, where the speaker couldn't speak because the crowd was going wild. And then it proceeded to happen every other time that sex work was mentioned. And so for us, this was an amazing, huge lesson around what we want. Because the next day, because we're here to win, the next day, yes, we were in the media. We were on the front page of the Daily News, not the 10,000 person march that was happening the same day. But again, winning. Charlize Theron came. She was one of the previous speakers who didn't mention sex work, and she came to apologize to us and to join our struggle, because what we wanted to be was part of the conference agenda. And that's what happened. People invited us to spaces. People came to our kind of little gazebo, really curious, asking questions. And for us, this was a huge eye-opening fact around kind of simple works. This was really cheap. A lot of the questions that have been coming into me was like, what about funding? What about funding for our thing? We need money to run campaigns. Like, this was really cheap. Sign, we bought a clock, we had the red umbrella, we put a bulb. But the thinking about it, the thinking about what we wanted people to feel, the thing about being really clear about what we wanted, meant that we could do something simple and effective. It doesn't have to be complicated. What we really tried was to make the invisible visible, because it was an invisible thing we're trying to talk about. And this, I think, speaks to me a lot about, for example, climate change. Like, a lot of it is visible, but for a lot of people, it's an invisible thing. So how do we come up with campaigns that visibilize things? Creating an irresistible image. This image was far more compelling than 10,000 people marching in the streets, because that is something that we've seen before. And surprise, like, think about when you come up with your campaigning, when you come up with your tactics, how do you surprise people? How do you catch people unaware in this day and age? It's hard. But we got to figure out a way. The third part of this is about who can give it to us. This is really important because, oh, I must say, so many of my dismal failures in my work has been because I hadn't done enough research about who can actually give us something. We quite often make assumptions about who actually has the power to do something, and quite often it's not. In a recent case, we thought, oh no, if only we get the Department of Justice to buy in to something, which we did. Department of Justice fully bought in. Little did we know that there was like an obscure little committee that had a huge amount of power to say whether a piece of legislation kind of meets constitutional muster or not. And we didn't know about this tiny, obscure little committee that held so much power. So it was a hard lesson for us to learn about. Okay, if we think about who can actually give it to us, and this for me is where systems thinking is a really incredible way of getting to the crux of that question. So systems thinking is a really amazing methodology about the interconnectedness of the system. So looking at the whole system and where does power lie and where does influence lie, and the understanding that power comes in many forms. There's not only one type of power, there's many types of power, and how do they play with each other? And it's the understanding of that complexity that really helps us figure out, okay, we know what winning looks like. We know what we want. Okay, who can give this to us? And I find plotting this out through a systems map or through, on the right, you'll see there a power map, is something that is, I think, really, really vital and something that we don't often sit back and take time to because we assume we know who has the power to change things. We assume we need to call on the president, we need to call on the Minister of Education, when actually, if we are a little bit more creative, if we think a little bit more broadly and complexly, we might find levers in places we didn't expect to. An example, because I must always give examples, because for me, a lot of this theory, especially around design thinking and systems thinking and kind of creative activism and neuroscience, is all very theoretical. I like to see how it works in real life. And so for an example for us is we really wanted to get into Parliament. We knew that Parliament was a space for us because there's different ways to change the law in South Africa. One of them is through the courts, multiple courts, High Court, Constitutional Court, and then one way is through Parliament. And we were pursuing every avenue we could. And so one of the things I like to do, because I'm a bit of a dork, is there's an incredible organization in South Africa called the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. And the core of their work is they have people, students often, that sit in parliamentary committee meetings and take notes. And they take minutes and they post them up to their website. Seemingly innocuous, but just gold. And so my favorite thing to do in the morning is have a cup of coffee and read parliamentary committee meetings minutes, even the obscure ones. And what we started realizing when we were doing this is actually we were thinking we needed to get into the Department of Justice kind of portfolio committee meeting. But we realized actually, if we wanted bang for our buck, there's the multi-party women's caucus meetings. And I realized this through when you start reading minutes, you start realizing, oh, this person has this position on a particular issue when this person's in the room. But if that person's not in the room, suddenly the position changes. And you only know that if you do the deep work. And so we realized, okay, multi-party women's caucus, that's where bang for our buck is. And we did the usual thing. We wrote nicely to the chair of the committee. We wrote to parliamentary members on the committee and just were getting nowhere, getting no responses, getting kind of emails bouncing back because half of them don't work. And then we took a step back and we created a power map. And we're like, okay, in this committee, for this committee, where does the power lie for what we want? And what we wanted was to get on the agenda. And so actually, do you know who holds the power to that? The secretary and the researchers. And the secretary and the researchers actually hold the power we need. They're way more accessible and they are way more susceptible to our charm. The politicians were not susceptible to our charm. They will not be charmed by us. But the researchers and the secretary is not used to getting the love. And so we gave them the love. And by doing that, and by the love, I mean information, fact sheets structured in the way that they needed to. We asked them for like, how do you want information? What is best? What makes your life easier? And we gave them that. And as a result, we won. So always going back to our aim was to get a space in Parliament. And not only did we get a space to present before the committee, but they decided to hold an entire summit around sex worker legislation. And this was such a powerful lesson for me in kind of doing the research. Doing that research really takes a lot of time out of in the long haul, playing the long game. Assume nothing. You don't necessarily know where the power lies unless you do the research and find out where it is. We often think that the people with the titles are the ones holding the power, and often that is not the case. And that's really important. Thinking about, for example, in your issue, like who approves the budget for that? Like who is the actual person? Like who is that person that is approving the budget for that particular thing? Like we need to know these things because often it gives us levers that we wouldn't have known otherwise, and different types of power. And again, know your terrain and use it to advantage. Like know what is happening in Parliament, know how Parliament operates, know the things that might make people's lives easier because they like you more when their lives are easier. When you structure things in a way that is useful to them and you don't just print out a million fact sheets and put it in all the members of Parliament's pigeonholes because they've seen that, they've done that, they are completely desensitized to that. So that was a really good example for like who can give it to us. And then, so we've done kind of the first three about building a campaign. So we talked a little bit about what does winning look like, what do we want, who can give it to us. The final thing I would like to talk about is this idea that going back to the beginning, I'm not creative. Creativity is only for external facing campaign stuff. Like we can only be creative if we're doing things in the world, engaging people. I'm a lawyer. Like I can't be creative in my work, or I don't know. I'm a policy specialist. Like I can't be creative. Or the question that got a lot around kind of yes, this is all fun and games, but how does this work for like serious things like fundraising? And I want to tell us that we can be creative in anything, like any part of our campaign, even the fundraising part, we can be creative. And I want to share an example of that about like any opportunity is an opportunity for creativeness. So we have funding crisis. We all know this, and I'm 100% in all your issues. There is a funding need. Um, we all have experienced this. We need money to do as much as creative campaigning really helps you do things cheaply and more creatively and more effectively. Still need some money to buy those umbrellas and that clock. And so we were thinking, we're having a brainstorming session. We were thinking about the AIDS conference, and we like to brainstorm crazy things because that's where the gold is. That's where you get the really innovative solutions to campaign problems. And one of the people in my team said, you know what? Elton John is coming to the campaign, coming to the conference. I really want to meet him. And I was like, okay, cool. Yes, we were like, yes, let's roll with this. Okay, part of our objectives of the conference is to meet Sir Elton John. Okay, why do we want to meet them? I really like his music. Okay, yes, and you like his music, amazing. Okay, the Elton John Foundation supports sex worker rights, has been funding in Europe and had just started funding in Africa. And this was a really good opportunity to get on their radar. And so we're like, okay, we are going to make one of our goals to meet Sir Elton John because we like his music, but because we also want to get on his agenda for the foundation. Okay, so sure, this is a man whose PAs have PAs. How are we going to meet him? He's a sir. And we were brainstorming and we were coming up with all sorts of generally illegal heist-like scenarios. So a lot of kind of Ocean's 11, we sneak into his hotel room, we kind of steal the outfits for the hotel staff and we hide in his, so lots of that going on. And so as we were brainstorming, more the merrier, because we know in brainstorming it's quantity, not quality, we thought, well, how do you get a famous person in a room? Let's give him an award, right? Let's give him an award. We're going to give him an award, and he has to receive the award, because if he doesn't receive the award, he's not going to look good. And so let's play this game. And so we emailed his people to say, oh, you know, Sir Elton John is the inaugural recipient of a very prestigious award given by the sex worker rights movement in South Africa. And it's just this amazing, amazing honor. And it would be great if while we're at the conference, if Sir Elton John can come and receive this award. We did not think that this was going to work. But we like trying our luck. It's always important to be ambitious. And so they responded and they said, we'll consider it. And then we're like, oh, this man's an EGOT. He has proper awards, like real Tonys and Oscars and things. We actually need to make an award. And so we made the award, the Asujiki Award for Courage and Initiative. Bit of wood, bit of glass. We have a lovely award. We took a nice picture of it. We sent it to his people going, yes, this is incredible that Sir Elton John is getting this award. Like you must know the honor that is being bestowed upon him. And lo and behold, we met Sir Elton John. This was our most unreachable goal of the campaign. And we did it. And there's me looking weird and awkward on the side. Let's ignore that. And so we met Elton John. This was wonderful, but let's go back to what I like always is winning. So what was the aim of this? Like, what did we want? We really wanted to get on the foundation's agenda. Did we do that? Yes, we did. Because after this, we got some professional pictures taken, and we sent it to his people to say that thank you so much. We would really love a meeting with the foundation. This is the work that we do, et cetera, et cetera. And we secured a meeting with the Elton John Foundation. This was a big thing for us because we were like, okay, so this creativity and this kind of thinking about unconventional ways and unconventional approaches can get us somewhere, not only for kind of advocacy campaigning and not only to kind of push forward our policy agendas, our legislative agendas, but actually like things like fundraising. When we apply our minds creatively, we can come up with different solutions, and it's so needed in the current context. Not only to be effective because we need to win, we want to win, but also we're tired. We're very tired. This work is exhausting. We all do very serious work, and the energy for it sometimes lacks. And so when we do actions like this, what it also showed me was that things like this are energizing. It's energizing for the spirit, but also like people want to join. And this is what we want. Like people that weren't part of our movement before wanted to be a part of our movement because if we're honest, it looked like we're having a really good time, and we were. So to think about how do we incorporate creativity into our campaigning? The lessons for this is you can always be creative. Be ambitious. This was our like moonshot, and we still figured we're gonna try and do it. Like why not? So be ambitious. It's so easy. It's really difficult to take a very grounded idea and make it creative and make it big and make it fabulous. But it is so much easier to take like a dream, a crazy idea, an insane idea, and figure out how to make it workable, to ground it a little bit. So to really think and dream big, to know the audience. Like we knew that we couldn't approach Sir Elton John in the same way that we'd approach, like would this work with another funder? Would this work with George Soros? Probably not. Would this work with other, like, I don't know, government funders? No, it would not. It worked because it also was Sir Elton John. So really knowing our audience and speaking the language. So speaking the language of our audience. And also that fundraising can actually be fun. I never saw myself as a fundraiser, but after this, I was like, okay, I can figure out ways to get to people with money and help them part with that money. So, 7 minutes. Cool. Okay. So a lot of you sent in a lot of questions. And so I'm hoping that through these stories, through some of the theory, through some of the lessons, some of the questions have been addressed. So it's kind of like questions around kind of limited resources, like messaging and comms, fatigue, how to engage people, how to keep momentum. I'm hoping that some of this has kind of lit some sparks around how to keep those things going in a campaign, how to increase engagement, how to really have people connect with your campaigns. These are a lot of lessons. So this is the lessons that we just covered. It was a lot in 1 hour, but it really comes back to this idea of kind of what motivated you to care and how we create those feelings in other people. How do we use the tactics that we have, use the strategies that we have to create those moments of kind of meaningful connections with people? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to get people to come over to our cause. If we just copy paste methods, because unfortunately, none of these examples will work for you. That's the kind of sad thing about creative activism. You can't copy paste any of them. They won't work for you because your context is different. Your politics are different. The power in your system is different. And so it's really about you being the expert in your own cultural landscape and being able to use that to create change. Yeah, we learned very quickly that what's funny in one context is not necessarily funny in another context. So to really think about your issue, your context, and apply some of these lessons in those spaces. I will be sending out after this. We're going to share a small little link to a survey where you can kind of give input about this webinar, whether some of the things are useful, whether they're not, if we're going to do a future webinar, like what are the kinds of things that should be included, because I know I only talked about kind of the first three. Within those first three, there's also a whole bunch of tools. So like there's wonderful tools around like, okay, you have a team, you really want to brainstorm around what does winning look like. You really want some exercises to do that. Or the second one is what do we want? What are some of the exercises that we can do to these are amazing resources by incredible organizations that have these toolkits and toolboxes that will help you get through that. Center for Artistic Activism is an organization I work very closely with as a trainer. They have all sorts of resources, including an amazing campaigning guide that will really kind of short, sharp ways to increase your impact around your campaigning. Beautiful Trouble, Toolbox for Revolution, one of my favorite go-to books, but their website is also equally as phenomenal. Mob Lab, a really great ways to frame campaigning. So really good questions to ask, really good ways. They have an amazing campaign canvas that I think a lot of people would find useful. Actipedia is my go-to when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling like, oh, we can't do this. It's a user-generated website with creative activism tactics from around the world, and people just submit their creative tactics, and whenever I'm lacking in inspiration, that's where I go to kind of rejuvenate myself. And then the wonderful Thomas Coombs with Hope-Based Communications, because I know there's quite a few, by the looks of it, communicators here thinking about narrative change and how to shift narratives. And he has some really useful, easy tools for narrative shifts. Like, how do you create narrative shifts? What are the kinds of things that you need to look out for, the things that you kind of have to do? And it's all kind of steeped in research and brain science, which I find fascinating. So, 2 minutes left. Yay. Went through a lot in 1 hour. Thank you so much for taking time to come to this webinar. I hope it was a useful thing. In that survey form, you will also find a link that if you want to chat, because also there's some faces here that I haven't seen in a very long time, and I want to catch up and I want to know kind of about your campaigns and what you're working on. But also if you want to brainstorm and talk about, this is something that I feel very passionately about, as you can tell. And so if you fill in that survey and that link, it will give you all the information. It will give you my Calendly, and we can immediately set something up and have a conversation around creative advocacy and tactics, as well as if I'm thinking about potentially wanting to do another webinar about kind of the last three aspects of kind of creating creative campaigning, whether those things will resonate, whether that would be useful, or whether you would really love a deep dive into one of them, because we did a very quick whirlwind tour of them, but within each of those questions, there's just a lot more depth to them that it's hard to get to in a short amount of time. So that will give an indication of that. So, sure. Happy Friday, everyone. I'm seeing some smiles, which makes me very, very happy. Oh, look you people, James, yes. Fill in the thing and give me your email and we shall talk. Let's create a community, please, of kind of creative campaigners and advocates and activists doing cool stuff, please. This is what we need in the world. Have a wonderful weekend for those who are going into the weekend. And if you're starting your Friday, I'm sorry, you're almost at your weekend. Bye, everyone.